Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Jonn Kares, and I don't know what we're going to talk about. John's got some stuff going on, and we've been talking for a while. We've been talking for already a half an hour, so I don't know where we're going with our conversation, but I'm sure it will be excellent. Welcome, John. Thank you for being here, and tell us a little bit about yourself, so we can kind of put you in a context.
Sure, Ed. Thanks for making this opportunity to have our conversation be known by others. Because we've had other conversations, and
Yeah,
I guess that's what prompted us to think maybe other people would be able to enjoy what we have to say with each other.
absolutely.
Um, we met through a group organized out of Ireland, and which meets every Friday, and we just have free form conversation there, and which really is is a reflect is a kind of a mirroring of, or there's a parallel with what it is you're doing with just bringing people together. Now it's not a group situation, obviously; it's just you and me. But you, how I got invited to that group in Ireland was through Richard Merrick, and he was a member of that group. And Richard is doing some fascinating exploring about uh, how to what the new world of work could be. I'm paraphrasing; these are not his words. I'm putting words in his mouth. But yeah, and this is through my lens that I'm speaking here. Richard is doing work in exploring the new world of work from outside the walls of existing organizational reality, stemming from his many years of working within and with organizations, and recognizing the hunger for um, ways of working that are more meaningful to the people who are actually doing the work. And this is not Richard's not the only person engaged in this kind of exploration and interest. I mean, it's on the top of everybody's mind. Anybody who's having to do any kind of work with organizations, either within them or working with them, has been frustrated by the realities of organizational life that seem to be insurmountable, seem to be unchangeable, seem to be unresolvable, and even difficult to even pinpoint exactly what is the problem. Where does the problem originate from? And so I become associated with that through my work as an executive coach, which I've been doing for many years. Um, and I was often doing that coaching without formally as a coach, without formally calling myself a coach. Because in the work that I was doing, and I've worked in a lot of different fields. I've been an architect, I've been a radio and television news broadcaster, I've been a B2B sales and marketing executive, I've been a media entrepreneur. I've worked with and within organizations. And whether I was working for myself or for someone else, I've always seen myself as being on the outside of an organization, one foot inside, one foot outside, which has worked for me because I found I found that, well, I found that my reliance upon organizations to provide everything for me to be lacking. And there were a number of experiences that I had that just revealed the shortcomings of that aspiration and that hope. That if things were going to be meaningful for work for me, I had to take charge of that. I had to be the one in charge of taking charge of how work was going to work for me. And so I've had a focus. I mean, I've only become aware of this of late, of how the distinct recognition for me about this has only become evident recently. Um, that making work work for me has come about because of how I've looked at who I am and recognized how flexible I need to be about my understanding of who I think I am and how I relate to the organizations that I'm working with. That flexibility has permitted me to be able to develop what I call a self-agility, being able to be true to my true nature and purpose by recognizing that I have to be flexible by thinking about what that means. That my purpose is something that is always there, that's constant. But my purpose is something that I'm always finding out what it is. And it's that investigative nature that has enabled me to interact with organizations in ways that are more satisfying and for me personally. And they may not fulfill the tried and true, carved in stone realities of what a career is, which I never really understood in the first place. I mean, when I was in first year high school, the guidance counselor came in one day and told us all that at the end of that class, the end of that period, we were all going to have chosen our life's career, because he didn't want us to be having the same problem that the final year high school students were having right then, who were not able to get into the university programs they wanted to because they hadn't taken the right prerequisite courses in high school.
Hmm.
And so to be able to get into the right university program, to reverse engineer all of this, you needed to pick your career today. So uh, for a 13-year-old, that was rather, you know, a, a ridiculous assignment. Um, One which, of course, I mean, being still young and open-minded to authority, thinking that it would know better than me, said, okay, fine, I'll accept that, and undertook the task. But at the time, I was going, but I don't know, this just doesn't sound right. And of course, it didn't take too long. Well, by the time I got into university, I found out how inappropriate that approach was, because it ended up my being flunked out of my chosen academic career in architecture because I was being too creative in architecture school. But which was very valuable, very useful for me to learn, very useful for me to find out more about where it is that I did belong or could belong, and where that place of belonging is is still unknown to me. I know it better than ever, but it's something that I still have to continue keep looking for.
So let me ask you a couple of questions about that. It's a very provocative problem situation that I think a lot of people experience. And so, how do you define that sense of whatever you want to call it, identity or whatever? I mean, is that a feeling? Is it an idea? Is it something tangible? Like what is this thing that you're seeking to grasp hold of, so to speak?
It's it's something that becomes knowable for me. I've come to recognize through exercising some practices regularly, and one of those regular practices is self-reflection,
Mm-hmm.
which can take many different shapes and forms. But self-reflection I guess, is probably as native to me now as breathing. I don't have to make an effort to self-reflect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's still practices that I adhere to that I find very valuable and useful, and which many people also do. I mean, I meditate and I go for walks, and a lot of this solitary. It's it's being alone with my thoughts that connects me with thoughts I don't know that I have, thoughts that I don't know yet that I could have, and it opens up it opens up it, it opens up the horizon in a larger way than I had that I know it in the everyday experience of my application of myself to things. Um, and so it's taking the time to do that that I think is probably the practice, taking the time to do it in whatever way I choose to do it, but recognizing that it's all being done under this umbrella of self-reflection, of being comfortable asking the question, who am I right now? What am I? Who could I be? What could I be? And and that doesn't mean discarding or throwing away or doubting what I know to be or and how I've positioned myself and how I present myself. It's just always being open to having it become something different or become modified in some slight way. Um, I mean, when you're in a boat on a lake, um, just one slight, half a degree change in the direction of travel takes you to a totally different place. And it's that those very tiny adjustments that make for a fresh understanding and fresh set of possibilities to become apparent.
Were there times in your past when you could honestly say, I like who I am?
Yes,
And there was a times when you were not pleased with who you were.
it's for me, it's been the contrast is between liking who I am and not knowing who I am. It's the contrast is not between liking and disliking. It's
Okay.
liking what I am and not knowing what I am.
So the question then, I mean, and this has been in the back of my mind since we started talking about this, is how much is the context of your life driving these questions? I mean, there are situations where you're flourishing because you're good at what you're doing. And then there's situations where maybe it's not clear, why am I doing this? Who am I in the context of this? I mean,
Mm,
I've seen that in my own life, where I got I got forced is not the right word, but I got placed in situations where clearly this is not what I should be doing. And therefore I had this question: is, why am I doing this? How do I do this? What is it that I bring to this situation? And and I think there is this dynamism about our lives where nothing is ever fixed or set. It's always in a state of movement. My basic illustration is that life is like the tumbleweed being blown across the desert in the southwest of the United States, and the tumbleweed is chaotically rolling and doing all kinds of things, but it's also going in the direction that the wind is blowing. So it's chaos in a particular direction. And that's the kind of the way I see life for
mm.
us. Now the question is, what is that particular direction? Is that a choice that we've made? Or is that something that we find ourselves in because of circumstances? I think these are all big questions that can help us if we let it help us.
Yes, yes. And I mean, being willing to be flexible with allowing things to change, or allowing the direction to change, or allowing the nature of the tumbleweed to change. I mean, that 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 experience in high school, being asked to choose a career, was a way of choosing a particular direction,
Yeah.
and it was a direction that I followed for a decade, and uh, ultimately realizing that where this is headed, it doesn't suit me. And so it asking me to leave was as much my wanting to leave it as it telling me to go. I mean, they're
Yeah.
one and the same thing. Um, it was a time for a change of direction. Um, but recognizing that tumbleweed, to use that metaphor, that I am and was, uh, that is still consistent. That still exists. That still persists. And where is there what the question is, where is there a place, could there be a place, where's another place where the tumbleweed could be moving? And so I mean, and I mean, and that actually, in my own experience, that was there was a period of several years where I was not knowing who I was, not I mean, the identity of the tumbleweed was not that clear. Um, and then I just picked something, which sort of fell in my lap. Well, more because I picked it. I
How
mean,
old were you? How old were you when you were experiencing that sense of not knowing who you were?
I guess in my mid-20s.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got to be in my mid-20s at that point. Yeah. Um, but there was an event, a conference that was being planned uh, that caught my attention, caught my interest. Don't know why it beguiled me, but I was very activated energy within me.
uh-huh.
It was called the First Global Conference on the Future, I think something like that.
Wow.
It was taking place in London, England, Toronto, Canada, and San Francisco, I think was the plan for it. And there were going to be simultaneous events. This is, of course, pre-internet. This is 1979. So having these kinds of global events like this was, an exciting thing. And there were plans to have satellite connections to be able to have streamed live event. And we take this all for granted now, but that was quite a big deal at the time. Anyway, I became and there were a wonderful lineup of speakers that were going to be presenting here. And I really was attracted to its mission, the mission, you know, about creating the future we want, I guess. Um, and So I became quite active in promoting it. And on a volunteer basis, I spent 4 months on the telephone calling everybody I knew and people I didn't know, inviting them to this thing, talking it up. And I mean that set me on a path of motion, which I mean one of those directions was bringing me to where the event was taking place in Toronto. I was in Ottawa at the time when I was doing all of this in Canada's capital. But this event was taking place in Toronto, so was, I that was when I relocated to Toronto, and I've been here ever since. Come to think of it, although I've had some times away in over the years, but I mean, it's still been my home base. I mean, that's a direction that is I'm realizing is still, and I'm at a place right now where I'm sort of saying, is Toronto the place I still want to be? Is I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it. It's
Right.
just I'm having a sense of maybe there's some place that's even better for me. And so I'm using this all as an example of talking about how it's a continuous, ongoing openness to possibility.
I totally understand this and have been having this same conversation with some other people over the last 2 or 3 weeks, uh, interestingly enough. And one of the things that I realized was that there was points in time in my adult life where I shut the door on what I'd been doing and I left that previous experience behind with the stories and with the people that I knew in that context, and I moved into something new. And to be able um, to make that kind of transition smoothly, where you walk away from this and you're not bringing all of this with you, meant that you're always starting over, and that is something different than reinventing yourself. So I'll give you an example. Um, in A decade ago, I went through three losses, and one was the end of my marriage. One was the end of my consulting practice, thanks to the recession. I mean, it just kind of petered out. And then I had taken on the executive director role in a nonprofit, and I got fired from that. And so I had these three losses. I spent a couple of years as an interim pastor, kind of sorting through things. And after that was over, 2 months later, I'm sitting in my apartment and I'm realizing if I'm going to do anything with the rest of my life, I mean, here I am, I'm 61 years old. This is 10 years ago. I'm thinking, if I'm going to do anything with the rest of my life, I have to move. So I said, I think I'll move to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. That is the extent of the thought that I gave to it.
Really? Just
Yeah.
out of the blue, Jackson Hole. Here I go.
Well, I had been there many times with the family. We'd
Oh, okay.
gone there on vacation. I knew a couple of people there, but to pick up and move from Asheville, North Carolina to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, as a 61-year-old divorcee, close to retirement, I mean, it's ridiculous thought. I mean, I can hear all my uh, older generations of my family saying, "What are you thinking?" So I called one of the two people I knew, and I knew that person. I knew that she had a sister-in-law who was a realtor, and so I said, "Will you give me your phone number?" So I called her up, and this is 2014, so 10 years ago, November. And I drive out the next week, spend 2 days looking at condominiums, put an offer on one, and by the end of January 2015, I'm owning property in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and preparing to move there. And I moved there without a plan, for a planner that's unheard of.
Mm.
But it just felt like I had to make the big change before I could recognize what I was supposed to go do. And so this is so I arrive, I move all my stuff in February. I have to come back to North Carolina for a number of events, and some of them family, some are work finishing up contracts, with some work I was doing for churches in March. And so I finally get out there, and there's a startup support nonprofit there for people who are starting businesses. And they have a monthly, first Monday of the month, they have an event. So the first Monday in April, I go to this event, and I'm just meeting people. And this woman comes up to me and she says, "Hi, and she introduces herself and she says, so she's asking questions. I said, well, I've just moved here. She said, what are you going to do? I don't know. And I said, I've been doing leadership stuff, but I don't know if that's what I'm going to do. She says, well, we have a program here um, called the Startup Intensive. I think that's what it's called. And it's a 10-week program. And we just take the people through a process that help them identify what they want to do and how to start a business. Maybe that'll be something you want to do. And I said, sounds good. I think I'll do that. Another very quick decision, just, oh, okay, I'm going to do that. I said, so when does it start? She said, tomorrow morning at 9. So I show up at 9 o'clock the next morning with a check for them. And I spend 10 weeks in the program. And all the stuff that we go through, I've already learned this stuff. But it's a reintroduction to all these principles. And I come out of that realizing I'm supposed to be a writer. I'm supposed to write a book. I'm supposed to write my story of leadership. And so that begins to happen the following year, and I spent 3 years doing that, and then I go through more changes, and so it's this idea of change being kind of the last bastion of desperation for someone trying to figure out who they are is actually the wrong way of looking at it. It's actually the first place to look, because I think context has a lot to do with this kind of defining who we are, and that's why I think having multiple contexts that we work in it's really healthy for us because it shows us more of the totality of who we are because we're seeing different sides of ourselves as we interact with people.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that if you want to make if you want to make a change in yourself, change your context.
Yeah.
If you can't stand the heat in the kitchen, leave the kitchen.
And
And
so I use this metaphor. We all live in a room. Each of us has a room that we're very comfortable in, and we don't, we've become very successful in. It's got our couch and our our bar with our scotch on the bar, and it's got our TV, and it's got it's got all of our friends in that room, and we're settled and we're comfortable there.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
there's a door in the room that opens, and it's only opened a little bit. So we get up and we go look through, and we see something new in the next room. So we pull the door open. We look in that room. We look back where we are. We look into that room. We look back and we said, it's time to change. And you walk through the room into the next room, and you pull the door closed behind you.
yeah, yeah. And
And
you start over.
you start over with a set of assets that you carry with you.
Yeah,
And that's your wisdom, that's your knowledge, your experience. It may be your relationships, but it's not necessarily. I mean, a lot of the people I've known over the last 25 years are not in my life any longer. And I'm not in their life because we're not in the same context together. I still care about them. I love them. When I see them, it's really great to be with them. But we're not actively involved with each other any longer, which means there has to be new people that we become actively involved with.
yeah, yeah. You said a moment ago that starting over is not reinventing yourself. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Help me understand that, because to me, starting over is the first step of reinventing. Reinventing yourself is necessary to start over.
Well, I'm assuming that I don't need to be a different person. I'm just moving into a new context where all the things that I am will find a new application.
Okay. Okay.
And that is really, really true. I mean, that's what I have discovered because when I left North Carolina, moved to Wyoming, um, I didn't know what I was going to see there. I didn't know what the culture was. The culture I knew was a vacation culture, so I wasn't going to be a part of that. And I found myself in a startup culture. A lot of people starting businesses, and that was great. And I learned a lot from that. But it wasn't really my culture. I was the outsider in that culture. And then after I was there for almost 6 years, it was time for me to leave because of the pandemic, and I sold my home and made a nice profit and paid off all my debts, and I started over. And I started over back here in North Carolina, and all I did was just write, and I wrote vociferously, and it changed the person that I was because it took things that were like um, small little boxes of little things that I carry around in a pack, and I pulled them out. Well, this is what I did, in 1975. And this is what I did in 1990. These little things, these are little experiences. But what happened was I was able to take all of those and kind of pump them with steroids and expand them in a way that changed who I was. It changed the way I relate to people. And then with that came the start of this podcast, and that was differentiator for me as a person. So the work that I've done with this podcast is the best work that I've ever done. And I look back at all the things that I've done before. It's not that they weren't valuable or weren't good work, but I've moved into a different place. And this is really much different because it has a level of impact that nothing I've done before had this kind of measure of impact.
Mhm. Yeah, I get that the context has changed, but I'm
Yeah,
also hearing that you have changed too. You are someone different than you were.
significantly so. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is maybe reinvention is the wrong word, but there has been a transformation of self. Your self is something different. I mean, it's consistently you, no question about it. It's always been Ed.
Well, I think it's that a lot of who we are is a response to what we think other people think we are. And we are kind of I don't want to say it's a game like playing a game, but we we figure out who, in a sense, particularly as we're younger, we sense who we are based on how we see other people see us. Because it's really difficult to stand outside of ourselves and see who we are
Hmm.
until we start seeing the things that we do have an effect that points to, oh, so this is where my real talent is. Oh, this is where my real contribution to the world is. And when that begins to happen, and I don't think most people have that experience because the world isn't oriented around that. But I think when you begin to have that kind of experience, you begin to say, "Oh, so this is what my life is for," and it creates a kind of a simplicity so that you can say, "Well, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to do any consulting. I don't have to do any coaching. I don't have to do. Oh yeah, I'll continue to do some training. I like to do some speaking. Yeah, I can do that, but I don't want to be responsible for someone else's react. I don't want to be responsible for someone else's reaction to what I have to say in their business, which is kind of like what a coach does. Takes on some responsibility of helping that person take whatever it is that you have to offer them and put it to practice in their organization. I don't want to do that anymore because I learned that I can't be responsible for them. They have to be responsible for themselves. So
Yep,
not
yep,
not to be responsible for ourselves. So
yep. This idea of we think we are who other people think we are, or the tendency for that is intrinsic, I think, with how we come into this world, and intrinsic with how we end up having to be reliant upon authorities, parents,
yeah,
caregivers, guardians,
hmm,
uh, to survive.
yeah,
And so much of without and being the blank slates that we are in terms of understanding our identity, we grasp at whatever we can to help make sense of our understanding of who we think we are. And so much of that we have to rely on comes from our interpreting what it is that the people around us think we are, or what we think they think we are. So we end up creating these identities that may or may not be well matched to the reality of who we are. And the reality of who we are is something we only get to learn through practice and experience
hmm,
and through the engagement with life over time. For me, what is saddening and disheartening is when the opportunity to be able to recognize that you are something other than what you thought you were and what you thought your parents thought you were, not having even awareness of that having happened, because that does not enable the opportunity to discover that there could be something else. That not happening is me the saddest part of that's what makes for life not being fully lived.
I agree with you. And
That growing up really means to be able to recognize that I'm not who I thought other people thought I was. Some of it maybe, but so much of it does not match who I'm discovering, who I really am, who I really can allow myself to be.
You know what I have found is that there is this is just for me. I can't speak of anybody else. But my understanding of who I am has a lot to do with the past generations of my family. And in particular, my grandmother and her sister, who are polar opposites, and both of their personalities, if that's the right word, are present in how I function in the world. I mean, my grandmother was the matriarch of the family. She was very, very clear about what her expectations were. And then her sister was the bohemian. I mean, she was an artist, and then she became an amateur anthropologist, and she traveled the world, and she had three different husbands over the course of her life, and she was totally open to everything, which is also who I am. So I think part of our challenge in our world today is that we don't have a very good generational knowledge of past generation, and I don't think DNA research is the answer to that because they're not telling the stories. I mean, the stories that my grandmother told about she and her sister, I mean, they were living in London at the beginning of the First World War, and they had to flee, and they had, so it's. Yeah, I think context has a lot to do with it. I think relationships have a lot to do with it, and it may be that we find people who care about us and who believe in us and are willing to let us go through that process of change so that we can discover ourselves that is what we really need.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's actually I'm realizing there's something that as a former or ongoing pastor that you are, I want to talk to you about one of the Ten Commandments
Okay.
related to what we've just been talking about. The commandment that goes, honor thy mother and father. I want to propose that it may be more appropriate to have that commandment be changed to honor thy children. And I look at this from the point of view of children can't help but honor their mother and father. It's they're dependent upon them for survival.
Mhm.
It's built in. Um, Being encouraged or admonished to honor mother and father seems redundant and superfluous. What I see greater opportunity is, and what I see greater tragedy in life is when children do not get honored, when children are not honored by their parents. And you could be the best parents in the world, but there's this recognition of how important it is for the child to feel loved, to be appreciated, to be, and this happens. I mean, right now it happens by accident. It's happenstance. Some people get it, some people don't.
Mhm.
And the Ten Commandments, this one commandment, I think would be made more useful if we allowed more people to be able to get the benefit of love from parents by being encouraged to honor thy children as one of the commandments. And I've come to reinterpret the commandment of honor thy mother and father as being what that really could be meaning is honor the mystery of how it is we come into existence.
Mhm.
Ah, that's mother and father. That is a meaningful commandment for me. But that I mean, how we come into being is Ed. That's a miracle. What is that?
I
It's
totally agree with you.
most.
And the problem, I mean, this whole discussion that we've had today, the problem at the core of this is that many mothers and fathers have no idea who they are and so they seek to discover who they are through their children, and then the children become confused and probably in many cases traumatized by the, the poor development of their parents as healthy human being, healthy adults.
Right. And imagine what it would have been like if they had had the benefit of the commandment of honor thy children being the thing that they had grown up in with, so that they are able to pass that on to an even greater degree from their greater understanding of it to their children. So we have a virtuous positive cycle being created, being passed along through the generations, rather than one where parents are maybe at the case you described, trying to identify themselves through their children, or just don't have any identity of who they are at all and not being able to love their children appropriately. And that's what the children pick up, and the children end up passing this on to their children, which becomes a virtuous, not a virtuous, becomes a downward spiral of the possibility of how wonderful it can be to be alive.
There's a YouTube guy has a YouTube channel named Mark Leta, and his channel is the Soft White Underbelly, and he interviews. He has a studio set up on the Skid Row section of LA, and he's interviewing people who are, you know, drug addicts and sex workers and the people whose lives have been really, really, really tough. And if there's a common theme that runs through the thousands of interviews that he's done, it is the breakdown of the family, where the parents are unable to take care of their children. The couple, the mother and father break up and one of them leaves, or they're both drug addicts or alcoholics. And so the child, the daughter who's 13 has to go fend for herself, and she ends up going into prostitution because it's an easy way to make money, and now she's 18 and she's an adult, and she's now confronted with, well, what am I going to do with my life? It's that these are the kinds of stories that Mark tells, and I saw that early in my life before I was married, because I was the community minister, and I saw the effect of broken families, because I was living in Atlanta, and I was working at a downtown church, and I saw all of this, and at some point after we had three children, my wife and I, and at some point after the third child, our daughter, was born, I realized that my responsibility was not to shape them into being another me. My responsibility was to help them learn to be able to make adult decisions as early in their life as possible. So I would ask them if I was asked a question, I wouldn't answer the question. I would ask them questions in return. I wanted them to be able to answer their own questions. And so if you knew my children today, you'd see they're extraordinarily independent, but they're also very mature. And I'm very pleased with how that turned out, because it was an experiment, and it meant that it was not that I was pushing them away. I was never pushing them away. We were together, but I was not going to make it easy for them to kind of look for the easy answer because their parent is going to tell them the easy answer. And so they're my best friends. And this conversation we've had today is the kind that I have, particularly with my sons, on a regular basis. And it's very gratifying.
What great company.
Yeah. Yeah, I
People
wish
you
they,
can actually hang out with.
yeah, I wish they could live here with me, but they obviously can't, because they're both married and they have their lives. But I think the point, John, is that the honoring thing is that we really should be honoring all those people that we have relationships with, and we honor them with respect, and we seek to build relationships of trust. And I wanted my children to be able to trust me, um, not because I told them to, but because I earned that trust. And as a result, I could trust them because they earned that trust. And so we did we did well as a family as a result.
That's lovely to hear, Ed. That's very gratifying. It's an example of what is possible, which um, I we need to hear more of. When I think about this edict to honor their mother and father, and the predisposition that children have to automatically do that anyway, that this predisposes us to we're conditioned to be looking always to authority as being the provider. The authority knows better. The authority is in charge of my identity. And we see this manifest in the larger world and how we've structured our institutions and our
Mhm.
organizations and how we relate to them. We 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 act and behave in ways that is consistent with this childhood understanding we had of how the world works,
Right.
which is not necessarily true. That there is a larger understanding, a different understanding of how the world works that emerges, that is the growing up that we don't get to do when we are honoring our mother and father in the way in which we never seem to, if we don't get to know that there's that there's something beyond that, that that's only the starting point,
Mhm.
that there's that there's a place to grow to, but that's what growing up is. Growing up is not getting a driver's license is part of growing up, yes, but that's not what growing up is.
I think I think that part of the problem we face, and I'm glad you brought up this idea of authority, is that we have seen authority as someone who lords over others. And and us, my sense is that the major problem we have in the institutional world is that the authority that people have is does not have the requisite accountability applied to it. And I mean, that sounds very simple and okay. Oh, yeah. But if you actually look at what is required to hold um, people accountable, it's extraordinarily difficult because it's um, it's not simple at all. It's not simple at all. And so we're dependent upon people taking making being accountable for themselves. And I don't think the world affirms that or rewards self accountability.
It's unrecognized. It
Yeah.
doesn't even exist. How can it exist if it's unrecognized? Yeah, yeah. Uh, so the opportunity lies in being able to support and assist with creating environments, contexts that support self-accountability, self-awareness
Hmm.
is a starting point,
Yeah.
and recognizing the impact that your agency can have and does have, and the impact that your existence has on the world, that you are actually creating your world.
We're about out of time, and I have one question I want to ask you, and and I think it's related to this question of figuring out who we are. But what is when we figure out who we are? We have a strong sense of who we are. what does that give us in terms of the hope we have for the future? Uh, how does that connect with the sense of the of our need for hope for us to be motivated to do whatever it is we need to do? But what is the connection between having a strong sense of self and the hope we have for uh, the future, or for a better world, or whatever? I mean, what's your thought about that?
For me, hope is something that only exists within me.
Hmm.
I'm in charge of hope,
Hmm.
and that self-reliance, self-accountability, self-resourcefulness is the source of my hope.
Hmm.
And hope is not a destination. It's the fuel of the starting point. It's the spark.
Hmm.
And that spark comes from within me. I have to create it. It's my work. I have to do it. And if I don't do it, hope doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I make hope happen. And and I and I depend upon other people doing the same thing,
Yeah.
having hope happen within them in their own way. That's a hopeful future because we're going forward without a plan. We just know there will be one.
Yeah. And that, the hope and the self accountability and the self knowledge all operate within the context of our relationships with one another. So we support one another. And I think that's also been missing in families, but also missing in society, where we don't have relationships where we say to the other person, "I believe in you, and I believe that what you're trying to do is really of
Yep. Even
significance."
if I don't agree with it.
Even if I don't agree with it, I
Yeah.
I wish them well.
Yep.
And and that's what I've discovered is the fruit of this podcast, is that I get to say that to people and to affirm them and to appreciate them and say, I hear you, I see you, I'm grateful for you, and go for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, there are ways in which that can be encouraged. And a lot of that has to do with, from what I've understood, what I've learned, and what I'm teaching is what I call right brain thinking, self-agile methods of right brain thinking.
Yeah.
Right brain thinking is often thought of just as being about, stimulating creativity, which it is. But more than that, it's a shift in understanding about your relationship to the universe and your
Mhm.
place in it, and how you can interact with it in ways that are unlike the way in which we've been taught.
Right.
Um, I mean, one very specific, distinct way of describing that is um, recognizing that certainty and uncertainty are not polar opposites. They're not equally balanced. They're not like two forces confronting each other. Which is the way in which we've been taught that
Hmm.
we're at war with uncertainty. That what we crave is certainty is the good guy, uncertainty is the bad guy, and it's this war between these two forces. When a shift in perception that I like to encourage people to consider is recognizing that certainty comes from uncertainty. That certainty is a small piece of what you've grabbed out of uncertainty. That's what makes it certain.
Right.
And certain has power when it's allowed to change, when
Right.
it's to suit changing circumstances, changing contexts. But that its uncertainty is the vastness of the infinite universe. It's all possibilities. It is from which everything is possible. It is the ultimate resource. You select from that by what you choose to look at, by the focus that you give, the choices you make, the decisions you make. That becomes what becomes your certainty. And that shift in perception and awareness is significant because it points to a relationship with the universe that we don't get taught, or we don't get taught enough, or that is ignored. We're actually taught that we're living in a world of shrinking resources, that there's less and less, and that in order to be able to survive, you've got to get, which may mean taking from somebody else. We're again in this war environment, and recognizing that we really do live in a universe of unlimitedness is a radical shift in perception that enables a whole new understanding of one's self-accountability.
Totally, totally agree. And thank you for all of that. It's such a nice little package, and it's worth hearing that. And thank you for coming on today. And I'm glad for this conversation. I didn't know that this is what we would talk about. I mean, um, but I'm really glad that we did. It's been really helpful for me because, when I moved here, I was starting over. When I left Wyoming, I was starting over. I've been starting over for most of the last 10 years, and I feel that I'm beginning to settle in, and I don't know what that means, but I like the way it feels. So that means okay, let's see what we can build as a result. So I wish you well, Jonn, and I know I'll see you, quite often over the next, months and years because we travel in the same circles. But I wish you well as you continue your quest for self-discovery and self-accountability and being the man that you seek to be.
I'd like to mention that I do offer opportunities for people to learn about these self-agile methods of right brain thinking. There's a group coaching program called Smart About Work. That is what I teach over the course of 8 weeks. And I'd like to let people know about that, the existence of that, in case it's appealing to them.
Send me all the information you want, and I'll put it in the show notes. That way people can find you.
Great. Wonderful, Ed.
Thank you, Jonn.
Really enjoyed our chat today. Thanks so much. I'm glad we met.
Me too. And thank you all for watching. I hope this has stirred up within you a sense that your life can be more than what you've experienced it to be so far. That maybe there's a stopping point leading to a beginning. Maybe you're going to walk through a door into a new room. Who knows? But if you allow yourself to be open to that idea, you may discover that there are things about your life and who you are that you didn't know existed, and you will find things that allow your life to flourish in ways that you cannot imagine at this point. And I hope that for you, and I wish that for you. And thank you, Jonn, for encouraging us in that way. Okay,
Here.
we'll see you soon here on the Eddie Network podcast. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.